Templating is one of the most advanced topics in Home Assistant and it causes people a lot of headache. However, you want to become a Home Assistant Pro, you need to master it. In this coding class, I'm going to teach you everything that I know about templating. This course is meant to be watched sequentially, but I'm going to leave timestamps in the description below if you want to skip to specific parts of the course. If you want to take this to another level, there's a link in the description below to my Smart Home courses page. This course will actually be uploaded over there, but over there you get to watch without watching any ads. You also have quizzes and assignments where you can actually show me your code and I can evaluate it and I can sort of give you feedback. And you also get some cool quiz and a little certificate if you can complete the course. But now let's roll the intro. So absolutely core fundamental concept for you guys to grasp before we move any forward, and this is like the only prerequisite. You need to have an understanding of what states, attributes and devices really are. Your device, so your bulb or your motion sensor, is represented in Home Assistant by something called an entity. The unique way of identifying an entity is represented by an entity ID. An entity always has a state, and the state is a representation of the entity. So if it's a light bulb, on and off. You can overwrite the states of an entity without actually changing the physical device. That's what you normally do in your developer tools, and it will not actually impact the device itself. You'll always have an entity ID, a timestamp for when it was last updated and last changed. You most likely will also have a name and a friendly name. Let's go to the developer tools and let's start playing around with some templates. Click on developer tools and click on the third tab, template. We're really going to be switching between template and states. So we're going to need to use both at the same time. If you want to, you can just open two windows if it's easier. We're going to start with looking at the states of an entity. So let's pick any entity. I'm going to go to states and I'm going to look for a specific light called iMac lamp, and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to click back to template and I'm just going to paste it in. At the moment, you can just see a string. So anything, I can write anything, and this is just going to be written on the right hand side. On the right hand side you'll see the result, you'll see the result type, so in this case it's string, and you can see what is the result. And over here we can actually type in whatever we want, so this is our editing area. And then at the bottom here it actually tells you if it's listening in to any event in case something happens. So this will change when we actually use real entities. So we know that every entity has a state, so we can get the state of the entity. So is this on or is this off, basically, because it's a light. So let's start writing some templating. So let's wrap around this statement over here with the curly brackets, and let's put a single quote around it all. And now let's type this in properly, and we're going to use a function called states. Open brackets, close the brackets, and we've got a result. So we can see our result is on because the light currently is on. There's another way to write this. We can write something like this: state.light.iMac lamp. And here you can see a huge amount of information. So you can see we have a template state. So we have a state, iMac lamp is on, we have some attributes. So there's plenty of information over here. Let's make more sense of this. So if we add a dot at the end and we add something like name, we can have the actual name of the entity ID. We can also reference entity ID again, and we can see that over here. And most importantly, we can get our attributes. So our attributes are going to give us a lot more information about what's going on with this entity. So the best way to actually get only one specific attribute is to use something called the state attribute. So if we have our curly brackets over here and we go state underscore attr, and then we're going to put in our quote and then fill in the information for your own entity ID, close that bracket, and it's saying the message. So we get an error message. So we're saying we're missing one requirement. So there's one argument missing, and that is the actual name of the entity that we want to get the information from. So now we can see all the entities. So if I want to pick the mode, I can just copy it in and add it here. And we have the value of the mode, which is normal. So you can see that this is the key and this is the value. So if I changed key, so if I used some other value, so I can pick brightness, and we would get the result, which is 212. The result doesn't have to be only one singular value. It can be actually multiple values. So if we pick X, Y color, and I copy that in, you can see we have two values. Now, specifically, this also happens with the RGB color and with different other things. Now, how do we actually split this out in a more concise way? So let's pick, for example, the RGB color. We should have three values, 255, 167, and 89. So we want to split them out. The easiest thing to do is to use this expression over here. So the curly brackets expression basically means go through a list and pick any value from a list. So if I just put a 0 on it, I will pick 255. If I change this to 1, it will go to 167, and I'll change it to 2, it will go to 89. So let me show you again. So I'm going to keep this, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to paste it down below, so you can actually see 255, 167. So the way this works is that the 0 value is the first value. So it starts with 0, and each value is incremental. So it's depending on the position, okay, in the list. So in this example, it's comma separated. So I can have something like this, 0, and I get 255. Cool, so we've got the values. Now, this is a integer. So let's see if we can do the same thing with a string. Now, if we pick a string, so let's pick, what can we pick? Let's pick mode. So fine, we're gonna go with mode. So let me just modify this mode. Cool, so we have normal as a value. Now, strings are actually, in Python, you can iterate through a string, and this is seen as a list. So to simplify this, 0 would be N, 1 would be N, not M, O, 2 is R, and so on and so forth. So I think you get the gist. So what we can do over here is we can pick the first value out of a string, and that's going to be a 0. We can then do 1, 2, 3, everything, and you can see the string is switching. So if you wanted to pick the first letter for any reason of a string, you can use this little trick over here. Hey guys, if you're getting value out of this video, remember to like this video, share this video, and comment down below and let me know which part you're enjoying the most. Now let's look at a few ways in which you can manipulate strings. So strings, you can change them in a few different ways. There's a complete list of functions I'm going to leave in the description down below, so you can actually go and play with this in your own time. The most useful ones for me are, for example, capitalize. So if we add this pipe expression and we add the word capitalize, this is written in American English with a Z, not an S, and you can see the results are different as we're going on. So let me just show you this in a better way. So add this in, so you can see on is sort of our standard result. We can capitalize. We can also do different things. We can do something called upper, which will convert all the strings to uppercase, and you can probably guess there's going to be another one here with lower. So lower actually is exactly the same as our original input, so this all makes sense. Now I'm going to show you another example, and I'm also going to show you how you can create a variable. The reason why you might want to use a variable, and you might want to use it for calculations or for just simplifying and not repeating the same templating code over and over again. So you do your templating code, you store it in a variable, and you might reference that variable later on in your templating code. So we've seen how states work. and we can see that the current state of the weather at home is rainy. The current, and you can see the attributes, so we see things like temperature, humidity, pressure. There's a long list of attributes. So if you remember correctly, we can do state attribute, open brackets, close. Cool, so we can extract the temperature by writing this expression. So I can get rid of this and actually get rid of this whole thing. Nice, so we've got this. Now, let's say, for example, that we wanted to do something like, I want to compare the difference between the temperature inside the home and the temperature outside of the home. So let's say we had a sensor, and this sensor was called, I think I've got one called kitchen nest. I'm gonna go and check now. Okay, so I've picked another sensor, the hallway sensor, hallway temperature sensor. So you can see it is 21 degrees in the home, outside is 6 degrees. So what could I do? I could actually decide to do some calculation, right? So let's say that I want to set a variable. To do that, you can open your brackets again. To do that, open one bracket, open the percent, and here we can write something saying set. So set is a keyword, and now we can you know, give our name of the variable. So let's say we say outside temperature, and in this case we need to use one equal, not double equal, because one equal is assignment, so it's going to assign a value in the outside temperature, and the value we are going to be assigning is basically this one over here, which is the 6.5, and then we close it with the curly bracket. Awesome. So you can see that this hasn't actually produced a value. So when you actually using one curly bracket and the percent, you are telling the, you know, the Ginger 2 templating engine basically to do an operation. You're not actually printing any value. The print statement always comes from double brackets, open and close. So if I print outside temperature, you can see now we've got a nice 6.5. So that's all good. So if we did something similar, so I copy this whole line and did something like change this state. So you can see that in some examples we're using the state attribute. So sometimes temperature could be an attribute, or sometimes temperature could be a simple state. So that doesn't really matter in our case, because I can just replace that. I can set it here, and I will rename outside to inside temperature. And then I can also print inside temperature. So let me copy, paste it in, give it a nice space. And now if I remove these over here, you can see I have 6.5 and 21.2. I can do something like a comma, and that will create like a list. I can do like a double equal, whatever. I can put some text in. Can I do a subtraction between the two, right? Can we do that? Let's see how we do that. So remove these brackets, and we can do something like this, an operation between the outside temperature and the inside temperature. So I don't know what's the difference. Error message we're getting over here, right? So we can't use the operand. So an operand is a minus. So if I did plus, it will be same error. Okay, so you can do minus, plus, multiplications and divisions. So we can't use this operand. So what do we do? Okay, so we can't use the operand. We need to, the message is actually telling us what to do. It's basically saying that we can't use it for a string. So one of these two values is giving me a string. So I'm assuming that the string is the inside temperature and the outside temperature is a float. In fact, let's try and swap them around and see if the error message swaps around. Yes, so you can see that now it changed. So the string is the first value and the float is the second. So you then know that the string inside temperature is a string. So if I convert the inside temperature, and I do that using a pipe, and I convert it to a float, so I just write float, ta-da, we've got a result. So because this is a float and this is now a float, we can see that the temperature difference is 14.7. So I can write some text. I'm going to just say temperature difference is 14.7 degrees. What I also would really recommend, I would recommend just adding a float at the end, even on the outside temperature, just in case. Now, because you are relying that this outside temperature, so this actual expression doesn't change. So in case Home Assistant makes an update and they decide that this is a string, you've already converted to a float. So you sort of future-proofing yourself. But technically at this stage, it's already a float, so it's not doing anything. Let me show you another example. So I started doing something a little bit more complex. So let's assume, so a weakness of thermostat sometimes that you have only one reading. So you might have your thermostat in a cold spot and you really want a good average, right? So in my example, I have a ground floor, first floor, and a second floor, right? So I might have different temperatures for each floor, okay? So I might want my main thermostat that kicks in to be aware of that. So what you can do is, if you have a lot of these sensors, you can set something, for example, let's say ground floor temperature or ground temperature. And you just collect all the sensors that you have and you convert them to float, and you keep basically adding them in until you get to, you know, your number of sensors. So assume that I have 2 sensors. So then I'm going to take an average. So I'm going to sum these together, and I'm then going to divide it by 2, and be aware of the brackets here. I'll show you. So basically this is state. So you have your normal state, open bracket, close bracket, and then filter on the float. So this is one expression. Then we've got another expression over here. Let's do this. Then we have this bracket and this bracket, which is doing the dividing by 2. And then we're wrapping that all again with these brackets to round it up to 2. And we have a nice float of only 2 decimal places with round 2. Obviously, if you did round 3 or round 4, you know, the things would be different. So far so good. Round 2, we'll leave it as it is. It's 20.3, and we always close the expression with the curly bracket, the percentage curly brackets, and then we can print it out with ground temperature. So maybe an assignment for you guys would be to complete this. So if you had multiple temperatures sensors, go ahead and do this, and then you can have an average per floor, and then you can have a general average, which could be the average of each floor, which would be slightly different than the average of all the actual sensors themselves. But leave that to you. I'm going to show you how we can actually loop from the states. So looping is a concept that I've covered in another video already, which is specific for looping. But however, I just want to be quite clear, looping is a powerful tool. It is something that I think you should all explore. So we're going to go through a different example today, very similar to another example I did with about battery classes in the past. So let's give it a go. Now the first line of code that we need is a output. So we're going to need to create an output. Remember, an output is just a variable. And in this variable, we are going to be storing 2 values. That's why I'm using namespace. And you can see the curly brackets, which means that it's storing like a list, an array. Let's make it simple. So basically, we're going to have 2 values. And the values are going to be the name of the sensor and the current temperature of the sensor. So we sort of need that first things first. Then we can start creating our loop, okay? So our for loop, we're going to say for. So we're going to be looking at for each state in. So for and in are 2 keywords, and you can see them going blue. So for state in, and we're going to go sensors states.sensor. Cool, and then we're going to close the bracket, close this up again. And we see we've got an error message because we're missing that and for. And I think the template syntax errors are quite helpful if we just try to read them and pay some attention to them. So what can we do? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that in, so we are good. So we're going to add the curly brackets, and we're going to just say end loop. So the end loop, and 4, and that's another keyword. I'll space it out because we know we could have something missing in here, and the error message has gone away. This is actually perfectly, acceptable. You can have something like 1, 2, and you can see 2 is repeated a number of times. The reason why that's repeated is because there are a lot of sensors in the list. So it's for each sensor that I have, I'm printing a value. Okay, that's the idea of a loop. It will continue to go and it will iterate from it. In fact, if I did state, you can see it printing out state. Let's see, I'll put that around the curly brackets, and you can see all the information that we have. So state, and you can see every single piece of information that you can use in the loop. So that's one important thing. So I can do state.entityId, and ta-da, we have a list of all our entity IDs. We can change that. We can do state.state, and you can see these are all of the values of those entity IDs. We can do both, so we can do something like this: state.state, and say equals, and then we do entity ID. Right? Okay, yeah. So I was getting this wrong, so we need to do something like this, them separate. Because we're not doing an operation, we can keep them separate in their own curly brackets. So now you can see we have the entity ID and the state. I can change this, and we can put this maybe something different. I think we can put like the friendly name. That would be like name, if I'm not wrong. Cool, so you've got name, which looks a little bit nicer than the entity ID. So this is the whole idea. So now what we can do is we can filter the sensors, so we can only have the specific set of sensors. So if you remember at the beginning, when we did just state, we saw a lot of information, so we got to leverage that. So we can have the pipe, and we're going to use the select attribute function, and we're going to be looking for a specific attribute. So we'll be looking for the attributes device class. So we're going to be picking out, basically we're filtering all of the sensors that have an attribute called device class, which probably everything does have anyway. So that's what the first thing we're doing. But now we're actually going to do something a little bit more complex. We're going to add an operand. So we're actually going to be comparing with double equals. And we're going to be using something called temperature. Now we have a list of everything that has actual temperature. How do I know? So let's check, right? So if we're looking at the one of these temperatures, so the bedroom temperatures over here, and this is what I'm actually using. I'm using the device class temperature. I could change this to unit of measurement. So if you had Fahrenheit or Celsius, you could use this, right? And say, oh, if the sensor has a device class and the device class is called temperature, then I will put it in my for. And you can see that is basically what we're doing over here. We're also pulling things that are unavailable, like the fridge temperature, which is currently not working. So we can also exclude this with an if statement. So the if statement over here will basically look at the states and deal with the unknowns. So if we open our bracket and we're going to say if, so we say is 0 is less than or equal to the state.state, and then we will convert all of this to an integer -1. Let me also close this up so we don't get too many error messages, and let's give it an end. So we need to always end the ifs, similar to how we end the loops. So if we indent this, we can start seeing a pattern. We should have excluded that value that we didn't need anymore, because what we're actually doing is, because we're using 0 as a value, we got to go -1. So we know that if that is happening. So if you see, if I put 1, unavailable appears. If I put 0, it's there. If I put -1, it's gone. But if I kept 0 over here, right, and I change this to less than instead of less than equals to, you can see it disappears. So what we're saying is that if we convert the state to an integer, okay, and if it's a string, it will convert to an integer, and then that would be basically give us that value. So I think we can do it either way. If it's clearer, we can have the -1 and the less than equal to, or we can just do it in a different way. You produce the same output, which I guess is important. Now, at the end of this if and the end of this for, we should actually learn how to print these out in a little bit better way, so we can actually clean it up. So we're going to be using a set. So we're going to do this, brackets, open, and again to close. And we're going to be set, so we're assigning the value. So we're going to give a value to output. So we're giving an equal, so we're assigning a value, and we'll be assigning basically itself. Okay, so output dot sensor. Why are we assigning output to itself? It's because what we want to do is, so imagine you have one temperature line, and then you have the second one and the third one and the fourth one. You want the results to append, so you don't want that when we go to the second line we lose the first one. So we need that, we need to keep adding, basically appending to the end of the list. So we have the output.sensors, so we need that, and now we can add the actual information. To add it, we'll be adding 2 values, because that's what we're going to be having in this little array. So we can add the state.name, and we're going to use a tilde, and the actual tilde, and you found it on the keyboard. The tilde is going to make it be a string. That is the point of this tilde. So add the quote and comma, and then we can space it tilde again, and here we can put state.state, which will give us our value of the actual sensor, and we can add a nice space at the end with our tilde expression. Now at the end of the loop, if I print the output just like that, now we've got to this point with output, and we can see that the actual sensors is an empty array, so it looks like we've gone wrong somewhere. So I gave this a little bit of a look, and I was missing the dot sensors. So the output dot sensors, here you go, was what was needed to actually get this all to work, because actually this, what I was saying before, basically is appending the values. Cool, so we can see that now we have all of our sensors outputting. We still have our namespace. Remember our namespace, we called it sensors, which reflects this line of code over here. So now what we're going to need to do is just go dot sensors. So we want to only get everything that's in the sensors list. So now we can see the list. How do we know it's still formatted as a list? Because we see these curly brackets coming through. So as any list, you can do 0, and you'll get the first value out of the list. You can do -1, and you can get the last value out of the list, and you can do everything, right? 2, 3, 4. If you know how long the list is, you can continue. So that's one way you can actually format this. You can actually do a nice pipe, and the pipe will allow you to use something called a join, which is a function that accepts brackets. And in the brackets, you can put something like, with the quotes, you can put a comma and a space, and you can see it all nicely in one piece of text. Or you can do something called a character return, which basically is the \n, which basically is the equivalent of an enter. And there you've got your nice list of sensors. Another example that we looked at previously was another example of a very similar thing, is that you can actually find out all the lights that are currently on in your Home Assistant instance. You get information like the name of the light, the status, which is on, and also the color, if you have an RGB color. So you can see that this actually is very useful, and you can use these in Lovelace dashboards, in so many things like text to speech. and you can just switch it off. For example, if you want to look at everything that's off, and you can see everything that's off. So it's easily customizable, and the code very similar to what I just showed you. Actually very similar. I think the only difference over here is that we have a state, and we're concatenating a state, and we're having another the state name, the state, and then we're just looking at the RGB color, which is a key, and we can see the state that attributed RGB color, and you can see RGB color over here. It's reflecting what's this. So if I change it, you can see that this text is updating. So this is sort of hard-coded value for this. As usual, if you're watching this, of course, you download the files and see how they're built for yourself. Now everyone's gonna have the sensor.date. It comes standard with Home Assistant. And this sensor input gives us a value. This value is a year, month, date. So that's cool. But what if we want to extract a certain part of the date? Okay, we can use a function called split, and I want to show you how we can actually do that. So let's take this value over here, and let's start splitting it. Okay, so at the end of this bracket over here, just start dot split, and let's open up brackets. Now as soon as I've done dot split, you can see that it's changed. It looks like it's become like a list. Okay, so it sort of knows that something is going to happen. Now how this is going to work, what I want to do is I want to split this like this. So I want to basically say year is, month is, date, day is. Okay, so I want to be able to break down this in 3 different parts. Okay, so the split is already creating a list, an array. Okay, it's creating an array, and I'm using these two in the context of today's lesson. I'm just using them interchangeably, list and array. Okay, let's split. On what basis are we splitting? We are splitting on the basis of the dash. So when there's a dash, we're splitting. Now this can work with anything. So if you have comma separated, a string with commas in the middle, you can separate on comma. You can separate on anything you want. So splitting it up like this basically means we have 3 values. So what I can say is the current year is, okay, I copy this, paste it in, and remember we've used this a few times, this trick. We can do our arrays, right? So we can return a single position out of the array, and we know they start with 0 and we increment by 1. Okay, and because the format is year, month, date, we know that already, I can just do 0, and that will give me that the current year is 2022. So most easily, it's very simple to do, because I just then, what I do, copy and paste, I replace year with month, and I change this to value 1. You can see the current month is 01. Let's continue. The current day is, and go value 2, and I see the current day is 06. Now if you want to take the O's out, you can add a pipe at the end and convert it to an integer. So you can see now pipe int, now it's not a string. 06 was a string, now it's an integer. It's telling me it's 1. And really for consistency, just do it on the year. So that's all cool. So you can use a split, and I hope you make good use of it, because it's quite a powerful function. You can use this also in Python if you're learning Python. Now I want to show you some practical examples of how I use templating and if statements in Home Assistant. Okay, over here there's a icon configurator. So the way what I'm doing here, and you will recognize the MDIs because they're like icons, and what I'm saying is if the state of a specific sensor called the home occupancy sensor is on, so the home is occupied, then the output of this will be an MDI and will be the MDI of home-account. Else, so if it's not, then I'm using the MDI home outline. And you can see I've got my end if at the end. So the basic structure of an if statement is you have the brackets. First is the condition, then if that condition is true, then the value that we're going to return, else, and then the other value, and then end if to close it. So another way you can do this, and I'm actually going to show you how I've done the home occupancy sensor now. So this statement over here returns a true or false. So the true basically means that the home is occupied, the false means it's not. It's how this is built. For each person that we have a person as Gio, there's Sabrina, okay? So we can evaluate these. So isState is a function that gives me true or false. It's not state, it's isState. So there's a difference between state and isState. So let me demonstrate that to you. So if I open my curly brackets and I put states and I remove this part over here, so you can see that the state of myself is home. I'm here, I'm recording this video. So the isState, how the isState works is that it uses a comma to evaluate. It's basically doing an if statement. It's saying if person.geo is home, then this returns true. So this is giving me true. Okay, but it's not finished there because the curly brackets are not closed. We're doing an or statement. So or is one of your operands you can use. You can use and, or, not, other operands. But basically and, or, and not are your most common operands. An example, an or, basically is someone home. So if it's not me, is it someone else? Or the last piece of the puzzle is an input boolean. So I have an input boolean with guest mode. So if there's a guest, and this can get triggered through people connecting my Wi-Fi. If there is a guest, then it will go on. So the home is occupied and this returns true. Now you can also use this logic in conditions. Now I'm going to show you something that you would have probably seen, JSON, and I'm going to show you how I use JSON. So I've got some code over here. The first part I'm doing, you must have seen this by now if you've been watching this video, but if you've been skipping along, I'll quickly recap. Setting creates a variable and assigns values to variables, okay? So the curly bracket over here is what is the convention used for JSON. And JSON comes with keys, which are temperature, and values, which are 25, okay? So we have this, we have a comma, and sort of this is 25 degrees Celsius, okay? What we can also do over here is that we can basically loop through the values in the JSON and output them. So for each, and I've got two values, for each key, this is a key, and this is a value, in my JSON test.items, I want to output the key. So let me just remove this so you can see it. So you can see the key and the value. You say it says temperature is, and we've got it over here. We can also change this key and we can add things like capitalize to make it a little bit better. And we've ended our for. So that's one way of doing things. We can also set our own array. So this I'm using normal brackets, so you don't need the key value pairs, and you can also do things like picking them out. So you can pick 0, pick 1, pick 2, and you can see I'm picking 22. So what you can do is you can mock things up. So you don't need, if you're using an API, for example, and you don't want to continue hit the API, you can mock up your JSON file. So create a mock-up here or mock-up array and then play around with your templating. So that's a tip that I can give you. One last cool thing I want to show you before we move into actually creating sensors and looking at conditions and how we can use these templates is the integration list. So there's something called integration underscore entities, and if you use it, you will actually get a cool list of everything or every entity ID that's actually part of an integration. So if you've got Hue, or if I change it to ZHA, which is sort of what I'm using for Zigbee, you can actually have the full list of everything that's dependent on integration. So I haven't really got a use case for this, but I thought I'd just mention it here as something that could be useful, and you guys might have some idea out of it. So let me know if you do. I'll be really looking forward to read what you guys comment. Now I want to show you an example where you use templating in automations. So automations are formed of triggers, they're formed of actions, and they're formed of conditions. Now in conditions themselves there is an option. So when you actually build out your automation.yaml, you can see that there's something called condition template. Now the condition template accepts a value template, okay? So if you put value template and you put this little greater than symbol, it means that you can use multiple lines to express what you want to express. So in here, I'm just making something up. What I'm doing over here, the meaning of this is saying this automation will only run in the first 3 months of the year. Why? I don't know. I'm just making this up. But you could use it for things like raining season, you know, or some sort of other way, okay? Winter, summer, whatever. The important thing really out of this is that you return a true value, okay? So whenever the condition is met, you want to return a true value. And this is the only thing you want to return. You don't want to return anything else. You don't need to do an else because it's not a sensor. You're basically just writing some templating code, which you would do in the developer tools. And once you're actually done, you will put it in your automation.yaml, okay? Now let me show you another example. Here in the configuration.yaml, I've got a snippet of my configuration.yaml. I've put it over here in the file editor so you can actually see it a lot better. So I've got a few different ways I've used templating in the past to create my own sensors. And then once you've got these sensors, then you can use them as anything else, and you really don't have any limitations. So if you find you're struggling with templating straight into conditions, for example, then I would suggest you create it as a sensor first and then do it later. Okay, so there's two ways of doing it. You can use template and then use sensor as a part of template, or you can do it the other way around. So you can have a template as part of sensors. The tumble dryer is an example that I'm using over here. So I'm using a energy monitor that's looking at the power of the tumble dryer and converting that to a float. I'm basically saying if the tumble dryer is at 0, then I'm going to say it's off. Else if, which is elif. If the state of the tumble dryer is less than 2, so it means that's between 2 but it's bigger than 0. If not, you would have just stuck at this. So if you got to this point, it means it's not equal to 0. I mean, it could be negative, but you can't really have negative energy. But in this example, it would be standby. Else, if it's not standby, then I'm assuming it's actually drying. This is what it's a tumble dryer. You can have this same code for washing machines, I guess anything you want. The home occupancy sensor is what I showed you previously, but this is how it all comes together. The icon template is what I'm using over here for the icon, so I'm returning MDIs. The value template is actually just all on one line, and it's going to give me true or false value. So this sensor is a true or false sensor. Home occupancy will be actually the name of the sensor, which is set over here, but the name is expressed slightly differently over here when you define the template, when you define the sensor as part of the template. And then at the end, I actually have a cover template. I have a garage door, and the garage door has a contact sensor, and in the contact sensor basically uses the state. So if the contact sensor state is open, which is defined by it being on, then I would say that the value of the garage door is open. If it's not open, it's closed, which makes sense. We've got end if, and then the icon template will change. So if the basically it's the same check again, right? So if it's on, it will show me the garage open symbol, and if it's off, it will show me the garage symbol. Remember, every time you actually make changes to configuration of YAML, you need to check if everything is fine before you restart Home Assistant. Do one at a time and check and test. Guys, you've made it to the end of this video. I fully appreciate the time they actually dedicated to watching this all. If you want to get even more out of it, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a link in the description below for the same content, but the content will be expanded upon. There will be new content coming on. It will be ad-free view for you. And also you get to interact with me through assignments, some quizzes, and you get a little certificate at the end. But also check out the rest of the page, because we're getting nearly towards 10 courses at the time of filming. Many more courses are coming online too. So consider subscribing to the actual membership, or check out the lifetime bundle to get the actual best value. This was Joe from Smart Home Makers. See you in the next one. Ciao.